Prospecting. You want to do prospecting? Before you jump into it, let's go over some of the factors that help those players become overnight successes, at least in the eyes of collectors, and those that drive their prices higher up. We're not going to cover all the factors. We're just going to cover a few that I think are important and the ones that we most should probably talk about, at least in my opinion. First of all, this is not financial advice. This is just helping people that want to collect cards and want to follow players and want to kind of invest in the players that they like and the players that they're expecting great things from. That's the basis we're coming from. So let me get that out of the way. There's one big overall driving force behind the players we chase, behind the cards we collect, and behind the prices that they command. That's hype. Hype is ultimately what drives everything. Now, these factors that we're going to discuss all contribute to that hype and help build up a prospect's hypeability, if you will, sellability, marketability. All that is driven by these factors that contribute to it. Some of you can fully appreciate this. On that last little segment that I just filmed, I had a Ricky Stinicky boss moment there, so we had to redo it. So I hope that one came across just as well. The first thing we're going to talk about, and this is in no particular order, no matter of importance or anything like that, it's just how I wrote it down on the list, and we're just going to go down them. They're all intertwined. They're all reliant on each other. But the first thing we're going to talk about is age. The younger a player is, the more potential there is for them to have a longer career in the pros. So obviously a player that's 18 years old is going to be more collectible, more desirable than a player that's 26 years old. It's just the nature of the beast. I'm going to stop you right there because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, the kids that went through college, that played 4 years at SEC school or something like that, they're more polished. They're more MLB ready. I already know what to expect from them. And that's great. And that's perfect. And you do know that. But it sets a cap and a floor for them that the younger players don't always necessarily have. The younger players can go one way or the other. And it happens with the college players. But with those younger players, it has more hope. Hope equals hype in the collecting game. And so when you see these younger players that are coming out that still have a lot of room to develop, a lot of stuff to work on, you can dream big. And that's what a lot of collectors do and a lot of prospectors do. I'm not saying the college players don't come out as a more polished prospect. And they may make the bigs in a year, whereas the other kid may be in the minors for 3, 4, 5 years before they crack a major league lineup, if at all. What I'm saying is the potential for prospecting is a 18-year-old kid coming out that's putting up those big numbers that a college polished professional might be doing is far more intriguing than a 25-year-old player doing it. That's the only point that I'm making on age. I'm not saying it's a determining factor on their talent level, on their skill level. I'm just saying it's a part of a determining factor in their overall collectability level and the prices that may command. The next factor we're going to talk about is team, and it's all intertwined. It's all connected. All of these are going to have to come together to create the hype for a player that we see on these big name players. But it's the team is one of those factors. So it's going to be your Yankees, your Red Sox, your Dodgers, your Padres to a certain extent. Probably not anymore, but the Braves every once in a while, the Mets, teams like that. Those are going to create more of a drive to those players. So you're going to have a marketing team behind them. You're going to have news media outlets covering them. You're going to have just large, rampant fan bases across the country that are going to drive that prospect's feasibility and collectability. Now, I'm not saying that's the end-all, be-all factor of it, and none of these are the end-all, be-all factor of it. So a team like Kansas City that has a small but very rampant and loyal fan base, I will say, Jack Caglione for them. He's one of the largest prospects in baseball, and he should be in the majors soon. But that is one of those that the team doesn't necessarily matter. But you have guys like Ben Rice that have come out for the Yankees that maybe would not have been such a huge prospect, but because he's on the Yankees, a lot more eyes are on him. And you've got guys for the Athletics like Nicholas Jeffrey Kurtz. Make sure I always throw that middle name in there. The Athletics don't have a fan base hardly at all because nobody knows what's going on with them. But there are still players that are collectible on their team. So that's why I'm saying it's not the end-all, be-all, but it is a contributing factor. The next factor I'm going to talk about is what I call buzz. I like that. I was like in Wayne's World. Foxy lady. But buzz is going to be, when you were a number one draft pick. And all of this is going to be intertwined. They're all going to be connected. As we go down this list, you can see where they all contribute to each other and they contribute to the hype level. But if you're the number one draft pick, you're going to come with a certain buzz. If you were a huge college standout and you were a college MVP, World Series MVP, you're going to come with some buzz. If you were the Little League MVP, if you were Big Al and you hit dingers, you're going to come with some buzz. You were a 13-year-old in high school hitting 500-foot home runs, you're coming with some buzz. So that is a contributing factor. That big hype ball on there is just a little buzz around the player, even before they reach the minors, even before they reach the bigs, anything, just something that their name's already out there to the public and people already know about them. So the next factor is going to be position. And if you ever seen any breakers opening cards or see anything like that, and they're thumbing through and they're going through and they're like, oh man, I see a ball, which means it's probably a pitcher. It's usually a letdown. Now, recently, that's been a bit of a difference, with Skeens in there. Go back to 2010 with Strasburg. Everybody was chasing that. So there are pitchers that are going to be in there. But generally, the pitchers that are going to be in there are going to be power pitchers, guys that strike people out and guys that don't give up many runs. And those are few and far between. There aren't people out there, there are very few collectors out there chasing middle relievers, chasing long relievers. Even closers have a very small, outside of like Mariano Rivera, have a very small collection window. So most of the position players are what you're going to be chasing. Your shortstops, your first basemen, your outfielders. To a certain extent, recently here, your catchers. Drake Baldwin, for example, has been a very hot prospect of a catcher, but it's not a position that generally we go after. Adley Rutschman, stuff like that. There are catchers out there, but generally it's going to be your shortstop, first base, outfield because of this factor. Power. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, we got Cy Young winners over here. Chicks dig the long ball. Just ask Heather Locklear. Like it or not, nowadays, that's what people go after. GMs, managers, collectors, it doesn't matter. They want that power. They don't care if the guy hits 50 home runs and he's batting 210. They want someone that's going to drive in runs, that's going to knock balls out of the ballpark. It creates an aura around a player if they hit 50 homers, 60 homers, 70 homers. That's what people chase nowadays. A guy hitting 350 is not as impressive as a guy that hit 40 home runs these days. And it's a sad state of affairs in baseball, but it's just the reality of the situation. So collectors are going to gravitate towards those guys they see on SportsCenter every night knocking home runs out of the park, that they're trying to catch a home run ball when they go to the ballpark. That's what fans are going to gravitate to, what collectors are going to gravitate to, and what ultimately you should gravitate to in your prospecting journey. The next factor is going to be path to the majors. And it's going to be the reason that some of those smaller clubs we were talking about, like the Royals or the Athletics, why their players do have a little bit of hype built into them is because there's not much blockading them from getting to the majors. There's not a lot of talent ahead of them in the minors, or there's not a lot of talent in the majors blocking them from being able to come up once they get through the minor league system. When you get into some of these other clubs, like if you're a pitcher in the Braves organization, you've got a lot of talent ahead of you in the minors. Not so much anymore in the majors, but a little bit up there. And, when you talk about a team like the Dodgers, all their positions are pretty much filled in the bigs and will be for a little while. So your path to the majors is part of the concern and part of what you want to look into. And that kind of requires a little bit of research to look and see who's ahead of them in the minors, look and see who's ahead of them in the majors, and build on that and say, this guy's got an easier path. That might be a better route for me to take. I can give an example of Christian Walker. For I love to use Christian Walker as an example, but for the longest time, I didn't collect his stuff because he was stuck behind Goldschmidt in Arizona, and it felt like Goldschmidt was going to be there forever. And once I realized that Goldschmidt, they were talking about moving him and talking about doing all this other stuff. Right before they traded him, I bought a bunch of Christian Walker cards because he hit like 29 home runs in the minors and was hitting great and, looked like he was going to have potential. And it's actually one of my success stories in my prospecting journey is Christian Walker. And as soon as they traded Goldschmidt, his cards went up. He became a hotter prospect, even though he was a little bit older, but he was putting up big numbers in the minors. Now he had a clear path to the majors and a clear path to being an all-star, to being successful. So sometimes that path in the majors is a big determining factor and whether that player is collectible or whether you should be prospecting him. This next factor is probably what should be the most important, and sometimes is, but most of the time isn't. That's numbers. The numbers that they're putting up, whether they were college standouts and they put up huge numbers in college, if they're just coming out in the draft, something like that, or the numbers they put up throughout the minors, is going to drive card prices up. It's going to create the hype, create the buzz. For example, I'll take Chandler Simpson this last season, who stole 104 bases, I think it was, or something like that. The hype around him and the hype around his speed in spring training, I'm sure some of you guys heard that and heard the discussion of Chandler Simpson. And he's up with the Rays now, and he's doing great. He's stealing bags, not at 104 bags level, but just the numbers he was putting up. And it's the way I do some of my research and the way I look at the players and who I'm going to prospect, things like that. I'll look at OPS. I'll look at slugging. I'll look at their batting averages. I'll look at how many home runs they hit. I look at the numbers, and the numbers are important, but that's not always the most determining factor. Sometimes there's a talent level that just needs some work, especially when you get into these younger guys. We're talking about the younger players. The numbers don't necessarily matter as much the younger they are, but as they get older, numbers become important. I know Tim Elko for the White Sox, who just got called up earlier this year. He put up huge numbers in the minors and was able to get called up. And those numbers were the determining factor, and his card prices jumped once he got called up. All that, we'll talk about that in a different video as far as prices go and things like that. But the numbers create another hype and another set of buzz around it. So that's another determining factor. This is my number one tip that I always give people that don't know anything about prospecting, don't know anything about drafts, don't know anything about that or what players to chase or anything. My number one tip is always let Major League Baseball do the prospecting for you. Let the draft be the determining factor for you if you don't know anything. When a player's taken number one overall, there's a reason for that. Whether it ends up being right or wrong, there's a reason for that. And the draft position itself creates hype, creates buzz. A number one draft pick is going to have inherently more value just built around him than the number 200th draft pick. So if that is what you're starting at, I just want to start somewhere, let Major League Baseball do it for you. Follow who they drafted. Their top 10 draft picks are probably what they see as the top 10 players. And that's how collectors think sometimes. Sometimes people hear those names of the draft picks and they're like, I want to get that guy's card. He was the number one pick. He's going to be great. Doesn't always pan out that way. But that is initially how those card prices are going to be set up. On when you start seeing them on eBay, the higher draft picks are going to be higher prices just because initially that is where the built-in hype is. That's where it starts, or most of it starts. So this determining factor is one that you've really got no control over as a player or anything like that. It's going to be your lineage. When you come into the league and your name is Drew Jones or Jackson Holliday or Kyle Karros, or your father or grandfather was a MLB player, an all-star, a Hall of Famer, you're going to have a built-in buzz around you no matter what age you are, no matter even what talent level you are half the time. Your name is going to be a driving factor, especially in the beginning. So those players that come along that they grew up around the ballpark and their dad was so great, it had to trickle down to them. Is it the case? Sometimes. Ken Griffey Jr., for example. But for every one of those, there's a million, Kyle Drabecks out there. Kyle Drabeck, a lot of injuries. I actually collect a lot of the stuff. I thought it was going to be good. But I'm just saying, there's a lot of situations like that where someone comes along and they weren't what they were hyped up to be. And so your lineage is going to, especially initially in the beginning, create that price, create that buzz, create that marketing scheme, half the time behind people. So that lineage is a determining factor. We're almost through our factors, but this one is important. This is going to be the level that the player is currently at that you're deciding to prospect. If you're looking at a 18-year-old who's in AAA, you're probably on the right path because that kid's not too far away from making it to the majors and he's very young. Ties back to the age thing. Just like I said, everything ties together. But if you're looking at a 29-year-old in AA who's putting up huge numbers, to talk about the numbers again and how important they are and how they're not important, if he's 29 years old or 32 years old and he's putting up huge numbers, most likely that's not going to be a card that you want to prospect and a card you want to chase. It depends on where they're at and what age they are. So those two determining factors kind of link together. I can give you an example on the other end, though. You take a player like Stone Garrett, who a couple years ago, he was hurt. He was out of the league for a while. He came back due to injuries. He came back. He was tearing up the minors. And I bought a couple of his cards. And I was like, man, but he was 28, 29 years old and in AA. But he was putting up such big numbers that he got called up and made it to the bigs. And then his card prices jumped a little bit. And I was able to sell a couple of them because of that. Just the numbers outweighed the age and the level that he was at. But in general, 99% of the time, that level that they're at is going to be a determining factor. If they're an older player and they're stuck down in the minors, then you're probably not going to have as big of a pursuit for that player's cards. But if they're younger and they're way up there and they're moving their way up, those are the players that you want to be keeping an eye on when you're taking your prospecting journey. So to kind of touch on what we were talking about with Stone Garrett, it ties into this again. The final thing that we're going to discuss is injuries. And there's really no controlling, not that you can control any of this, but there's really no controlling injuries. But you can do a little research. You can look into a player. And some of this does take research. Some of it's just dumb luck and, it is what it is. But a lot of it can be controlled with research. If you look in there and you see the kid had 2 ACL surgeries in high school. They had 2 Tommy John surgeries in high school. They've tore their knee, their ankle, their shoulder. They've had some major surgery done or something like that. That can help kind of figure out, you see a kid who had Tommy John's, he's throwing 102 miles an hour. He's probably got another one coming in his future. And so those injuries, by seeing there are players that you just like, man, that guy's always hurt. That guy's, I'm looking at you, Jacob deGrom, who I keep drafting on my fantasy team, and he keeps getting hurt all the time recently. There's just certain players that are more injury prone, like it or not, whether it be the way they deliver a pitch, whether the way they roam the outfield, whether the way they swing. There's just certain players that are going to be hurt. And those players are tough to prospect. I mean, Acuna right now for the Braves, who has not been stealing bases this season because of his knee surgery, because of everything that's been going on. He's still hitting home runs, but he's not the base stealer that he was before due to the injuries. So that's part of his talent and part of his what people collect about him and like about him that he's not able to display and put on a showcase right now. And not to jump sports, but take an example like Bo Jackson, one of the greatest talents we've ever seen. If he hadn't have got injured, what would his collectability level, what would his card prices be? Would he be up around like a Tom Brady level? Brady stayed relatively healthy his whole career, and that's a determining factor. So if you look at a player and you see he's had a bunch of injuries, that he's had major injuries early in his career or even before he was drafted, that may be something that determines whether you want to prospect this person or not. Something to consider. I hope that helped you more than ran you off from wanting to be a prospector, from wanting to prospect cards. There's a lot that goes into it, and those factors are not all of the factors. There are plenty more out there. Those are just some of the ones that popped in my head, and I actually added injuries at the very end, just so I can talk about it with you guys as well. So I hope if you're going down this prospecting journey that some of that helped you, and that you take some of that to heart and you understand what you're getting into. There's a huge reward in the prospecting and collecting when you get that hot player and you have it and you've got your friends to show. If you're sitting on all these Shohei Ohtani cards or you're sitting on some Mike Trout cards and you're just proud as can be. But for all of those, there's a huge risk as well because there are more players that don't ever make it. I love to give examples, but I have a bunch of Adenzo Reyes cards, mainly because I got a out of 5 Bowman first auto card of his, and then so I started collecting other ones thinking I was going to have the next big red Bowman first card. But he, was cut, and he was young. He was 17 and played shortstop. We just had this whole conversation about it, and he checked all the boxes and had the talent level, and never panned out. They cut him a couple years later, and now I'm sitting on a 1 of 5 Bowman first Adenzo Reyes card that I can maybe get $50 for. It's clean. I can get it graded, maybe get 70. But that's the risk of it, is the majority of these players aren't going to pan out. And we'll do another video coming up where we talk about when the best time to sell a player is, when the best time to buy a player is, and things like that. We'll have that in another upcoming video. I don't want to make this one too long for you guys, but thank you for watching. If you've got any suggestions, any things I might have missed, anything you want to talk about, go ahead and drop it down in the comments. If you can, like this video. Also, subscribe over here somewhere. I'll throw another video up here for you guys to watch, and I'll see you guys next time. And if you want to go on this prospecting journey, it sounds so weird when I say that. Hey, hop in the wagon. We're going to go look for gold. I mean, I guess.